Chapter the Cinco. Hover, convert your old road car into a Skyway flyer. The end of the summer vacation dragged on too long for Harry's liking. He was looking forward to getting back to Hogwarts. This dreadful month at the Bureau had been the oddest in his life. It was difficult to decide which was worse, life with Ron's family or that with the Drubblesnorts. For one, sleeping in Ron's shack was awfully awful. It rained more often than it should probably have at night, and of course the place leaked. At the Drubblesnorts, he had the whole dry basement to himself and plenty of air conditioning. The Drubblesnorts did treat him like a slave, however, where the Weasleys all treated him like as if he was the Pope. But even that didn't satisfy Harry. He still had no TV, and Ron was of course a real bore. There was also constant bitter sadness in the air, as Mr. Weasley had been hauled off to a place called Azkaban. If it was even half as bad as it had been described to Harry, the place sounded even worse than here or living with the Drubblesnorts. On their last evening, Mrs. Weasley fought her sorrows and conjured up a sumptuous dinner that included all of Harry's favourite things, culminating with Mrs. Weasley pouring a full ladle of chocolate pudding down Harry's mouth. He almost choked several times, but she could tell he enjoyed it and was in his element. Fred and George rounded off the evening with unveiling a large hand-painted banner that said "Welcome home, Dad," for when and if their father ever returned. They all toasted Mr. Weasley with one last mug of hot chocolate and then hit the bed. It took a long while to get started next morning. They were all hungover from the feast the night before, with way too many cups of hot chocolate being consumed that may or may not have been spiked. Mrs. Weasley went about in a bad mood looking for spare socks and quills. People kept clashing together in the tiny kitchen, half dressed with bits of wizard strudel in their hands, and Percy had broken his neck, tripping over a stray gnome as he crossed the yard carrying Ginny's trunk to the car. Mrs. Weasley couldn't see how 8 people, 6 large trunks, 2 pigs, and a rat had all fit into one tiny Ford Anglia. And of course, they didn't. It was Harry who awoke first, a couple hours after the small Ford putted away from the Bureau. He shook Ron awake, which took quite some doing. "Ron," Harry said. Nothing happened, so he said again, "Ron, come on, Ron." Still nothing. Now Harry began to shake Ron awake. "Ron, rise and shine. Come on, Ron. Ron. Come on, Ron, get up. Ron. 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 Get up. Come on, Ron. Rise and shine, Ron. Rise and shine. Come on, Ron. Come on, Ron. 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 Cock-a-doodle-doo." Ron finally stirred. "What? Is it morning already?" With yawns the two boys wondered what time it was. It seemed awfully bright out. They wandered across the yard to the kitchen in their robes. Ron was first to open the door and questioned where everyone else was. "Mum? Fred? George? Where are you guys? Percy? Ginny? Hello?" With no answer, Ron ran outside. Harry followed. Ron headed down to the barn where the DeLorean was. It was parked where they had left it. Ron started to feel a little nervous. "The car is still here. They didn't head to the train station. I made my family disappear." "Didn't your mom say something last night about a car rental?" Harry asked. "Oh yeah. That's what we did last year. We didn't have the DeLorean then. Now that you mention it, I do recall her saying something last night about how there was no way we'd all fit into the front seats of the DeLorean. That would explain why there's nobody here. They left without us." "What time is it?" Harry pondered. "We might miss the train." "Blimey!" Ron exclaimed. "It's already 11:20, we missed it all right. How could they just leave us? Didn't they know we were not there?" What had happened was, in the commotion of the morning, combined with the overeating the night before, Percy needing a last-minute neck brace and the undertone of Mr. Weasley not being there, nobody was thinking very clearly. So when everyone was all packed up tightly in the largest rental car Mrs. Weasley could afford, which was very small by the way. Nobody questioned where Harry and Ron were. None of them noticed until after arriving at the Hogwarts Express train platform when Mrs. Weasley started to send off her offspring with a kiss that she questioned where Harry was, and then soon after, Ron. "Harry," said Ron, his eyes gleaming. "The DeLorean. What about it? We can fly the DeLorean to Hogwarts. Is that wise? We're stuck, right? And we've got to get to school somehow, haven't we? Well, can't we just use powdered water to get to Hogwarts? Or at least as close as we can?" SHH. Are you crazy? I'm just going to pretend I didn't hear such a thing. Come on, now's our chance. I've always wanted to fly the DeLorean. Harry's feeling of panic turned suddenly to excitement. "Can you fly it?" "Fred and George did, so it can't be all that difficult, can it?" said Ron, already heading back towards the living quarters. "Come on, let's get our stuff. If we hurry we may even beat the Hogwarts Express." And they marched off through the grassy and trashy grounds to retrieve their things. They heaved their heavy luggage into the frunk, put Pigwiggy in between the only two seats the car had, and stepped inside, closing the gull-wing doors as they did. Harry turned to Ron. "Ron, what if we don't succeed in making it to the school?" Ron looked straight ahead with a very serious glance forward. "We must succeed." With that, Ron started the engine and they bolted out of the barn. They turned along the country road that led away from the Weasleys' residence. Ron pressed a tiny silver button on the dashboard. The car began to lift up. Higher and higher they climbed into the sky. Harry could feel the seat vibrating beneath him, hear the engine, see the treetops below him get smaller and smaller. It's working," said Ron. Then there was a reoccurring popping sound and the car fell a little with each noise. The vibrations were getting more fierce as they climbed higher. Ron saw the concerned look on Harry's face. "Don't worry, she'll hold together," Ron assured. But under his breath he muttered, "You hear me, baby, hold together." Soon they were approaching the clouds above. It was a fairly overcast day that blanketed almost the entire sky. "I'm going to give it all she's got, hold on," Ron yelled, and he slammed his foot on the accelerator. They shot straight into the big, puffy clouds and everything turned dull and foggy. "Now what?" said Harry, blinking at the solid mass of cloud after flying through one for some time. "Do you have a plan here?" "Well, no. Not exactly," said Ron. "I was just going to head towards London first and follow the train tracks away to Hogwarts." "That doesn't sound like a very good plan, Ron," Harry replied. "There must be hundreds of rail lines that originate from London." "Hundreds?" Ron questioned, surprised. "We need to get our bearings, we've been in this cloud a while," said Harry. "All right, I'll dip back down again." They dropped back beneath the clouds and started poking their heads around the windows, squinting at the ground. "I can see it," Harry yelled. "Right ahead, there." The Hogwarts Express was streaking along below them like a scarlet snake. Smoke billowing out of the engine and leaving a smoky streak behind from whence it came. The boys felt a great big sigh of relief and commented on how high the odds were that they just happened to stumble upon the train like this. "Due east," said Ron, checking the compass on the dashboard after following the train for some time. "It's been heading east for as long as we've been following it. That's strange, I thought Hogwarts was somewhere northwest. Let's head down for a closer look, hold on." They went into a sharp dive. The train was eventually directly beneath them. "I'm going to pull alongside it, hold on," and Ron slid the car to the left and floated down at window level. They could see a bunch of flashes going off inside. They weren't sure what that was about, but they did realize pretty quickly this was not the Hogwarts Express. This they could tell right away from the different style coaches being pulled. What they had actually found was in fact the Duchess of Sutherland, Another scarlet-red steam engine, but this one pulling an excursion train full of Asian tourists who were all quickly snapping away pictures of the flying car before them. Ron, looking out over at the coaches. Well, where's the Hogwarts Express? We've lost valuable time. Harry had suddenly grabbed Ron's arm. Ron, pull up. Pull up now. Ron looked forward. Whoa. Ron lifted the car up and just barely missed another oncoming steam train heading in directly for them at full speed. You don't think? Nah, couldn't be. Check anyway. Ron entered a tight U-turn backflip and finished with a barrel roll. This put them right near the tender car and they easily spotted its scarlet shine. They approached the front part of the engine. This time in big gold letters they could clearly read Hogwarts Express. Both breathed another sigh of relief and both couldn't believe their luck again. They had found the train they were looking for, now heading in the proper direction. All they had to do was fly back up towards the clouds and follow it all the way to the school. They'd land the car somewhere inconspicuous and blend in with the rest of the students at the school. No one would be the wiser. Their perfect plan was in fact going to work. All we've got to worry about now are airplanes, said Ron as they shot up back towards the clouds. And helicopters, said Harry. What are hecopeckers? Asked Ron. Oh, never mind. Just don't hit one. Harry replied. Okay, don't hit anything, right? Said Ron, still a bit confused about what he's not supposed to crash into. They looked at each other and started to laugh. For a long time, they couldn't stop. This, thought Harry, was surely the only way to travel. Oh, to see the looks of Fred's and George's jealous faces if they just so happened to land smoothly and spectacularly on the sweeping lawn in front of the whole school. What an entrance! Several uneventful hours later, however, Harry had to admit that all of the fun was wearing off. He had to go to the bathroom and the continuous vibrations weren't helping. The salty snacks he brought made him extremely thirsty and they had nothing to drink. And then there was the air conditioning. There wasn't any. If that wasn't bad enough, the two tiny windows in the side of the car failed to roll down. Even though it was an overcast day with clouds above them, the sunlight still pierced the windshield, creating a greenhouse effect inside. He and Ron had pulled off their school robes, then their t-shirt and shorts until they were both in their underwear. Harry had seriously thought about taking them off too. But Harry's back kept sticking to the back of his seat and didn't want his bottom to do the same. His glasses kept sliding down to the end of his sweaty nose, both were drenched in sweat. Harry had stopped noticing the fantastic countryside landscapes now and was thinking dreadfully about how the train was still miles from its destination. He also dazed and fantasized what he'd be doing if he were on the train right now. First, he'd find the closest bathroom. But afterwards, he'd find the snack cart lady and buy her out of every flavor of ice-cold juice and ice cream she had. Why had Ron's family failed to wake them up? Can't be much further, can it? Croaked Ron, hours later still, as the sun started to sink over the horizon. The Hogwarts Express was still right below them, speeding up as it was coming down out of a winding snow-capped mountain pass. Ron put his foot on the accelerator and drove them forward to keep pace with the speeding train, but as he did so, the engine began to putter. This was a new sound it hadn't made before. Harry and Ron exchanged nervous glances. It's probably just tired. Yeah, that's it, said Ron. It's never been this far before, you know. And they both pretended not to notice the obvious puttering growing louder and louder as the darkening sky became ever more so darker. Stars were popping into existence, almost as if a new one came into view with every putter of the engine. Harry pulled his robe and other clothes back on. Ron couldn't bother as he was concentrating on driving in an ever-increasing darkness. Not far, said Ron, more to the car than to Harry. Not far now, little one. And he patted the dashboard and rubbed it with nervous love. There. Harry pointed, making Pigwiggy's cage fall over. Straight ahead. Silhouetted on the dark purple horizon, high on a dangerously eroding cliff over Lake Lagoon, stood the many turrets and towers of the great and corky Hogwarts castle. But the car had begun to shudder and was starting to lose altitude. The engine was very clearly dying. "Come on," Ron said, giving the steering wheel a slap like it was a disobedient child. "We're so nearly there, come on." Ron, did you make sure the petrol was full before we left?" asked Harry, an idea brewing in his head as to what might be behind the recent noises. "What's petrol?" Ron responded. "Uh-oh," Harry answered, blank-faced and looking forward. The engine croaked and choked and banged and gargled. Until finally, it had completely stopped altogether. Harry found himself gripping the edges of his seat very hard to the point where he was ruining the leather. They flew ever closer towards Hogwarts, yet with each yard forward they dropped 2 towards the ground, then 3. "I'm going to try and level her off," Ron screamed. They were still over the tracks, almost in a nosedive straight ahead of them. Ron tugged the wheel with all his might. "Brace for impact." Ah! They were falling, gathering speed, heading straight for the solid ground. A piece of metal flew up into the windshield before vanishing behind them. Harry assumed it was the front license plate. Just when it had appeared that all was lost, the front end of the car began to tick up back towards the horizon. And mere moments later, the car had leveled off just above the railroad tracks, its tires skimming the rails and nearly avoiding a horrendous collision with the ground. With this last tremendous bit of maneuvering, the DeLorean had lost all power and control in the process. There was no gas left in the tank or even any fumes. The car now glided silently along the rails which had been cut through a thick forest. "Harry, I can't steer," Ron nervously said. "That's okay," Harry said, "this stretch of track seems to be fairly straight. We'll just keep gliding along and eventually we'll touch down, right?" Right," Ron replied, unsure of himself. But it was at this moment that the boys realized there was a slight bend in the rails ahead. Harry's eyes got wide at the prospects. "Watch out for that tree!" Harry bellowed, just now thinking about clicking in his seatbelt. Bang! With an ear-splitting bang of metal on wood, they struck the side of a thick tree trunk along the tracks just as it had started to bend. This caused the car to spin and slam into the ground with a huge thud, wobbling and spinning ferociously until it came to a stop on the tracks. The boys were now facing the direction they had come. "Are you okay?" Ron said urgently. I'm alive." "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you," as Harry looked up with prayer hands. But the celebrations were short-lived. A low rumble started to shake the ground. Harry and Ron looked at each other and knew what was coming next. The chugging around the bend was a dark outline of an oncoming train heading straight for them. "Run for it!" shouted Ron. Both stared straight ahead at the outline of the Hogwarts Express coming full speed towards them out of the dark while they struggled to undo their seat belts. At the very last possible moment, both Harry and Ron managed to get their respectable gull-wing doors open and dive out either side. The Hogwarts Express smashed completely through the DeLorean, ripping through it as if it were tinfoil, and continued rolling on. As the train passed, Harry stared up at the coaches as they clickety-clacked on by. He saw his fellow schoolmates, many of whom were half-dressed and changing into their school robes. All seemed to be completely unfazed by the dramatic crash that occurred just moments before. After the train zoomed out of view into the darkness beyond, Harry walked across the tracks to Ron. "Now there's something you don't do every day," said Harry. "Remind me never to let you drive again." "I'm fine, by the way. Thanks for asking," Ron muttered. Harry just ignored him. "Mum's going to kill me though. I'll never hear the end of this one." "I figure, we're about 2 miles from the school, wouldn't you say?" Harry pondered. "Something like that," Ron said depressingly as they walked back towards the scene of the crash. "There's not much left," said Harry as the boys squinted out over the wreckage. It was now pitch black with only the stars above providing a faint light, but they could see well enough to know that it was complete obliteration. "Let's find our wands. We're close enough to the school, yeah? We ought to be able to use them, right? For light?" "Yeah, I'd say so. Besides, this probably qualifies for one of them extreme cases being that we almost got killed and all," Ron agreed. The boys panned out, sifting through the wreckage. Ron started to spot many things that were once his property. Once being the appropriate term, as everything he found was nothing more than tiny bits and pieces of his former possessions. Even his clothes appeared to be nothing more than torn fabric, which was a problem because unlike Harry, Ron had not changed back into his school robes and was still in his underwear. Despite this and the immense darkness, Ron managed to find something of his that wasn't completely shattered. "My wand!" yelled Ron when he found it, in a shaky voice. "Ah, look at my wand!" It had snapped, almost in two, the tip was dangling limply, held on by only a few splinters. Harry opened his mouth to say something funny that just clicked into his mind, but decided against it. Ron was already in a delicate state and didn't want to rock that boat any further. Harry meanwhile had even less luck than Ron when it came to finding his things. Nothing he found resembled anything of his. It was all small twisted bits of metal or fragments of Ron's subpar belongings. Ron attempted to provide light through the use of his wand, but only faint flickers found its way out of the tip. Still, this was better than nothing. And through one of flicks, Harry could make out what appeared to be a large box off in the distance. The object was along the tree line a good ways away from Ground Zero where the train had smashed the car. Could it be? It was Harry's trunk. Miraculously it appeared to be intact. Harry opened it, nothing inside appeared broken. This even included the diamond-studded glass crystal goblet embroidered with HP he had purchased from Diagon Alley a few days ago. Harry still couldn't believe his continued luck. He dropped many a galleon for this custom piece alone, not to mention all of his other clothes and possessions that he now wouldn't need to replace. Then Harry heard an oink. "Wow! Pigwiggy! I forgot all about you," Harry blurted out. Pigwiggy was in a battered cage laying not far from Harry's trunk. Upon inspecting the damage, Harry would have thought that whatever was inside would have been killed. But Pigwiggy was very much alive and appeared to have nuked the fridge. Harry pried open the cage door, which took some doing because it was heavily smashed in. Pigwiggy jumped out and flew off toward the castle without a backward look, oinking madly. "Was that your pig?" Ron asked Harry as he approached Ground Zero again. "Yeah, somehow survived all right. Her cage took a good beating though," Harry replied. "I haven't seen any sign of Scabbers. Perhaps he was obliterated with the rest of my stuff and Mum will let me get a new pet," Rod said, not seeming to worry at all. Scabbers the rat was nowhere to be found, but Ron knew there was a slim chance he survived the wreck and would annoyingly turn up at the school as he did last year after being thrown out the window of the Hogwarts Express. "Found my stuff. Trunk's over there," Harry said, pointing backwards. "Not a scratch on it, can you believe that?" "Some guys just have all the luck," Ron groaned, looking down at his small collection of torn fabric, a few found Lannister pages, and of course his broken wand. "Hey!" yelled Harry suddenly. He walked over to the tree line. "Look! It's my broom. My nincompoop 2002. Amazingly, even this survived the crash. The broom was sitting up neatly against a tree near the forest edge, just as if someone had placed it there. This is great. Now we don't have to walk, we can just fly to the school. Come on," said Harry, grabbing his prized sweep, "we'd better get up to school before someone notices we're not there. I don't think you're going to find anything else in this wreckage." "What about my clothes?" Ron asked in a concerned voice. "I can't exactly walk into the Great Hall in nothing but my underwear." Hagrid's, Harry stated. We'll have to swing by his hut on the way in. He usually has something on the line out back you can, borrow. With that, Harry walked over and attached his trunk to his broom using some rope that was once part of Ron's rowbelt collection. Harry mounted his broom and Ron did as well right behind him. Harry gripped the broom tightly, hoping he still remembered how to do this. Ron had no choice but to grip Harry around the waist, which startled Harry at first. But soon they were off and flying once more above the treetops, streaking towards the castle. After a brief layover at Hagrid's hut on the edge of the forest where Ron found an oversized shirt 10 times too big, the boys landed next to a giant pile of other trunks waiting to be sorted and sent to their proper houses and owners. Harry slid his in without incident. It was the perfect crime. He tied his broom to his trunk and rejoined Ron in front of the great oak doors that welcomed students to the one and only Hogwarts. It wasn't exactly the triumphant arrival they had envisioned. Shaken and stirred, they seized the door handle and slipped inside. "I think we're already missing the tasty feast," said Ron, surprised and hearing the low rumble of chatter coming from the direction of the Great Hall. They hurried over and, together, he and Ron peeked inside this greatest of halls through the closed main doors. Countless number of lit candles were hovering mid-air over 4 long, jam-packed tables, dripping hot wax occasionally on unsuspecting students. Overhead, the bewitched ceiling sparkled with stars and occasionally a shooting star slipped by. Through the spiky scene of pointed black Hogwarts hats, Harry saw a long line of scared first-years filling the hall. Ginny was among the herd, hard to miss because of her vividly wild Weasley hair. Meanwhile, Professor Hardcastle McCormick, a spectacled old witch with her hair in a tight bun, was placing the famous Hogwarts sorting hat on a stool before the newbies. She looked distinctly ruffled, as always. Every year, this aged-old hat, patched, frayed, and dirty, sorted new students into the 4 Hogwarts houses, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Viacom, and Slytherin. Harry well remembered putting it on, exactly 1 year ago, and waiting, petrified, for its decision as it muttered aloud in his ear. For a few horrible moments he had to endure hat piercing his mind, looking into his deepest secrets and darkest thoughts. At first, the hat was going to put him in Slytherin, the house that had turned out more dark-side witches and wizards than any other by far, but he had ended up in Gryffindor, along with Ron, Hermione, and the rest of the Weasleys. Last term, Harry had single-handedly helped Gryffindor win the house championship, beating Slytherin for the first time ever. It had also come with a coupon for a free butterbeer, but Harry wasn't sure what that was or where to even turn it in. Harry heard a rumor that he'd be able to use it next year, but as the coupon expired in July he hardly bothered to look into it. A very small, bug-eyed boy had been called forward to place the hat on his head. Harry's eyes wandered past him to where Professor Dumbledore, the headmaster, sat watching the sorting from the staff table, his long silver beard and half-moon glasses shining brightly in the candlelight. Several seats along, Harry saw Jaime Lannister, dressed in robes of aquamarine. And there at the end was Hagrid, huge and hairy, drinking deeply from his goblet. "Hang on," Harry muttered to Ron. "There's an empty chair at the staff table. Where's Snape?" Professor Severus Sugar Buns Snape was Harry's least favorite teacher, although he did have a pretty good figure from behind, Harry must admit, for a man anyway. Harry also unknowingly called Snape a woman in front of him and the entire class last year when he is in fact a man. It was a whole thing. Snape was oily, brutal, stale, and disliked by everybody except the students from his own house, Slytherin. Snape was the potions teacher. "Maybe he got fired," said Ron hopefully. "Yeah, and deadly ill," said Harry, "became all depressed when he missed out on the Defense Against Dark Side of the Force job again." "Or he might have been killed," said Ron enthusiastically. "I mean, everyone hates him." "Or perhaps," said a very frustrated voice right behind them, He was sent out to look for you two when you didn't arrive on the school train." Harry spun around. There, in his black robes, sniffling from a cold, stood Severus Snape. And at this particular moment, he was smirking in a way that told Harry and Ron were in very deep trouble. "Follow me, boys," proclaimed Snape. A delicious smell of food was wafting from the great hall through the crack in the doors Harry and Ron had been peering through. Yet this was odd because clearly the sorting was still commencing and no food had yet appeared on the tables. Regardless, Snape led them away from the warmth and light, down a narrow secret stone staircase behind a suit of fat guy armor that led into the dungeons. "In you go," he said, opening a door halfway down a cold passageway and pointing with his thumb. They entered Snape's office, shivering. The shadowy walls were still lined with charred fire marks, which Harry was not about to admit that he was the cause of last year. Snape slammed the door and turned to look at them. "So," he said softly, "the luxurious Hogwarts Express isn't good enough for the famous Harry Potter and his trusty sidekick Ron Boy Weasley. Wanted to arrive with some style, did we?" "No, sir, you see sir, we overslept and—" "Silence," said Snape coldly. "What have you done with the car?" Ron gulped. This wasn't the first time Snape had given Harry the impression of being able to read minds. But a moment later, he understood, as Snape unrolled today's issue of the Evening Heretic. "You were seen," he hissed, showing them the headline, "Flying DeLorean Mystifies Muggles." He began to read aloud, "Two muggles out for a jog, convinced they saw a flying DeLorean fly through the sky at noon in Norfolk." Mr. Dannon was quoted as asking, "What the hell is going on here?" Snape trailed off the article. 600 or 700 miles in all, probably more. "I believe your father started the exploitation of Mole Relic's office?" he said, looking up at Ron, his smirk getting even more nasty. Dear, dear. His own son. Caught red-handed exposing magical enchantments directly in front of moles. The papers will not look too kindly on this, that I can tell you. Harry felt as though he'd just been hit in the stomach harder than the Hogwarts Express smashing through Mr. Weasley's automobile. If any mole found out Mr. Weasley had bewitched the car, much less thousands perhaps, the whole jig might be up. I noticed after talking to the Hogwarts Express engineer in my search for you lot, that considerable damage has been done to a very valuable DeLorean in the woods, Snape went on. That train did more damage to us than we, Ron blurted out. Aha! Snapped Snape. An admission of guilt. Most unfortunate you are not in my house or I'd expel you right here and now. But as you have confessed, I shall go and fetch the people who do have that happy power. And here I thought I'd really have to grill you too, oh well. Harry and Ron stared at each other as Snape left the room. Harry didn't feel hungry anymore. He now felt sleepy. He wasn't much afraid of Snape's threats. He had the Potter privilege and couldn't be touched. Ron on the other hand. 10 minutes later, Professor Hardcastle McCormick slammed open the door with such a loud bang that it echoed up the hallways and reverberated throughout the entire school. Snape strutted back in behind her. Harry had seen Professor Hardcastle McCormick angry on several occasions, but even this took her max up a notch. She raised her wand the moment she entered and hit Ron squarely on top of the head. Harry and Ron both flinched, but it was Ron who felt the real pain. Explain yourselves, if you can, she said, her glasses narrowing. Ron launched into the story, starting with how their alarm never went off and they overslept. So we had no choice, Professor, we weren't going to make the train. Why didn't you send us a letter by pig? I believe you have a nice tubby pig. Professor Hardcastle McCormick said coldly to Harry. Harry looked at her, perplexed. Why was she drilling him? Either way, she had a point. I didn't think. That Mr. Potter, said Professor Hardcastle McCormick, is obvious. There was a knock on the office door. Snape opened it with giddy excitement. There stood the headmaster, Professor Dumbledore. Harry's whole body felt relief. He was practically BFFs with the Dumbledore. No way would he be in trouble now. Dumbledore stared down his very crooked nose at Ron. There was a long silence. Then Dumbledore said in a freakishly calm voice, "Please explain why you did this." It would have been better if he had shouted their heads off. But Ron told Dumbledore everything anyway, except that his dad owned the bewitched car, making it sound as though he and Harry found the DeLorean that just happened to fly in the woods. He knew Dumbledore would see through this at once, but Dumbledore asked no questions about the car. When Ron had finished, he merely continued to peer at them both through his spectacles. After a few awkward moments, there was another knock on the door. An old man walked in looking deadly serious. The stranger had rumpled grey hair and an anxious expression, and was wearing a strange mixture of clothes, a pinstriped suit, a scarlet tie, a long black cloak, and pointed purple boots. Under his arm he carried a lime green bowler. "I came as soon as I heard, school bus." "That's Dad's boss." Ron breathed quietly to Harry. "Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic." Harry elbowed Ron hard to make him shut up. "So, it is true then? Harry Potter is responsible for all the hubbub in the papers?" Minister Fudge said as he turned to Harry and Ron. "What to do, what to do?" Just then, yet another knock pounded on the door. It seemed like everyone in the wizarding world knew of Harry's involvement and wanted a say in how to cover this up. Done. 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 This is the end for now, but not the end of the story. Harry Potter will return to complete his tale of conquest at a later time.